With us now, retired NYPD detective Tom Verney. Tom, good morning. I want to first get your impressions on why we are on day 3 and still no real information as to the identity of this person. There are so many different, it looks like, images, people of interest, but still no positive ID.
Yeah. Good morning. And I'd like to first express my condolences to the family of Mr. Thompson. I mean, this is a horrific act to occur to anyone. And I know there's been some reporting about some, alleged fraud investigations and whatnot. But at the end of the day, this is someone who's been murdered, and the family now has to deal with the repercussions of that, especially during the holidays. As far as the identity of this person, and if this person was a former client of the New York City criminal justice system, we would probably already know who he is just through the use of facial recognition. Since the facial shot, still shot that we've seen is pretty good, even though it doesn't show the whole head. But there's enough points on there that they might be able to make a hit on that if this person was involved with the police here in New York City. It is very possible this person has never been involved with law enforcement at all as far as being arrested. So, but his face being plastered all over the newspapers and news shows around the country, I would hope that someone would recognize who he is. Also, if he had some sort of a grievance with United Healthcare or the CEO himself, then I would imagine he probably put that out there in some form. Whether it be through text messaging or on Facebook or Twitter or some other sort of social media postings. And then you just make the connection, and then someone just needs to make a phone call and alert the authorities.
Yeah, it's, Tom, I want to continue our conversation. I want to bring in NBC's Stephen Romo. Stephen, good morning. What's the very latest on the investigation? What are authorities looking at right now?
Yeah, Jose, just getting an update here that investigators have not found a name for this suspect. They have not identified that suspected shooter now. Concerning, of course, because it has been more than 48 hours since this shooting happened. Investigators have found dozens and dozens of images from surveillance cameras, and they're trying to track his timeline around Manhattan. We know that they believe he arrived here on a Greyhound bus that originated in Atlanta, perhaps a stop along the way. He could have gotten on board there as well. And it could have been up to 10 days before he actually committed this shooting, which we're seeing right there in that surveillance video that we frozen just before the shot. So that could potentially put a long timeline, a large digital trail for this gunman. But we also are hearing that investigators aren't sure of a way that he could have left the city, if he left the city. More concerning there as well to not know which direction he could have gone and how he could have possibly made that escape out of the city, if he indeed has that. It seems like there is still a long way to go in getting that more information. And, of course, we would like to have an update, a briefing from the NYPD, but that has not happened since the day of the shooting on Wednesday.
Yeah, Tom, how do you see and how do you define, explain, I guess, the fact that authorities, 3 days in, don't really even know if he is still in the city? There are a lot of ways that a suspect can escape. Certainly, if it's him that is on those images in the video of him on the e-bike heading towards Central Park, that would mean that he could have done a number of things inside there. But what are some of the questions that you have, Tom, as far as why 3 days in there's no ID when there's so much apparent information in forensics?
Well, the fact that he took great lengths to conceal his identity, apparently while he was staying at the hostel, he always had his hood up, his face mask was on, and as of right now, this seems to be the only video clip that we saw there, the still picture that we saw of him lowering his mask during that one period of time. So he was very careful to make sure he was very well concealed. And in a city like New York City, you could disappear into a crowd and no one will ever know, who you are. I mean, there are celebrities who walk the streets of New York City and walk by people and people have no idea who they are. So if you're going to do this anywhere, really, New York City is the place to do it. And there's one of 10,000 ways you could get into or escape from New York City. Where he got off at 85th Street, that's not that far from a couple different subway stations. So you could hop on a subway, get down to the Port Authority bus terminal. If he came in by bus, which it seems like he did, he could have gone down there and hopped on another bus to get out. Because it wasn't, we didn't come to the conclusion that he got to New York City by bus until later on, a few hours or hours later into the investigation. So he could have, gone out through there. He could have, just left through mass transit into other parts of the tri-state area. So he could still very well be in New York City and be walking around right next to somebody and they wouldn't know unless he, again, lowers the mask and someone happens to recognize him from the media reports that have been put out there so far.
Yeah, and Stephen, what kind of resources do the NYPD have at its disposal in this investigation? And are there state and federal resources in cooperation here?
Yeah, there's no word on any federal resources or even state resources that may be involved. We know the NYPD does stay in regular contact with the surrounding areas, police departments for any type of investigation, really. But of course, NYPD is one of the most well-equipped police departments and well-staffed police departments in the country. So they have a force out to try to find, right now, these video clips from different surveillance angles to try to piece together a timeline for where this shooter may have moved, potentially in those 10 days before the shooting actually happened. They have a lot of legwork to do, but again, it has been more than 48 hours now for them to do that legwork, and we're still hearing that they do not have an identification for the shooter.
And Tom, just on your experience when you saw that horrible video of this gunman, shooting this gentleman, the fact that his gun jammed apparently 3 times, he didn't leave the weapon at the site of the crime. He took it with him. What are some of the things that you saw here and that you think maybe can help define who this person is?
Well, there's a couple of footnotes. One is that the fact that they haven't been able to identify this person yet, a couple of days into this investigation, is not uncommon, to be honest. It's I think a lot of people get wrapped up in watching a lot of cop shows and movies where cop shows on TV, the crime is solved in 43 minutes without the commercials. These investigations are extremely daunting, and there's a lot of material to go through, tons and tons of video footage to go over. And now we're talking about the fact that he had been in New York City for 10 days, potentially coming up here on a bus from Atlanta, right? So now we're having to backtrack his footsteps from Atlanta. So I can almost guarantee that they're probably already in discussions with law enforcement authorities in Atlanta and covering over or going through a lot of video footage in the Atlanta area and the bus terminal where he left. As far as his actions on the street, there's been this debate as to whether or not he was a hired hitman or whether or not this is just some psycho with a gun with a grievance against the insurance company or this particular CEO, maybe a former employee perhaps with a grudge. It could be one of those three, right? It's only a couple of different motives really that would kind of fit why someone would just arbitrarily pick this person, lay out a plan, and go through pretty great lengths to make sure that their identities, have been obscured, and know where the CEO potentially would be on that date, on that time. The interesting thing is that the firearm that he was using, he was using some sort of a noise suppressor on it, which was kind of ironic that he would choose to put a suppressor on the gun when he's then going to shoot this person in plain sight of a handful of people. If you see in the video there's to the immediate right of where the shooter is, within a few feet is someone standing there, and to the immediate left is someone sitting in a parked SUV with the lights on. So, it's why bother with the suppressor if you're going to shoot somebody right in front of other people? So that was kind of odd. But he clearly knew the area. He knew where he could kind of get away to. Once you disappear into Central Park, again, that's you could be anywhere going into and out of Central Park in an arm's reach of a lot of different parts of Manhattan. So he planned this out. That's for sure. Could he be a hitman? Possibly. I think a professional, quote unquote, professional hitman would have been more of a ghost. You wouldn't have really seen him much other than doing the act, and then he would have just disappeared, and would have been much more careful to not leave as many clues behind as this person has so far.